Welcome to today's video, where we'll dive into a topic that's often on the minds of many Muslims. How do modern democratic principles compare with the teachings of Islam, especially when it comes to leadership and elections? Modern democracy is often seen as the gold standard for governance in today's world, emphasizing values like freedom, equality, and the power of the people. But how does this align or clash with the principles of Islamic governance, which are rooted in the Quran and Sunnah? Today, we'll break down 5 key principles of modern democracy, compare them with Islamic teachings, and see where they align and where they differ. Let's start. Our first principle is popular sovereignty. In simple terms, this means that in a democracy, the ultimate power lies with the people. They get to choose their leaders and influence the laws that govern them. This idea became popular in Europe during the Enlightenment when philosophers like John Locke and Rousseau argued that governments should serve the will of the people, not the other way around. But here's something to think about. While this gives people a voice, it can also lead to what's known as the tyranny of the majority, where the majority's views dominate and minority rights can be ignored. So popular sovereignty has its strengths, but it's not perfect. Now let's compare this with Islamic governance. In Islam, sovereignty doesn't belong to the people, it belongs to Allah alone. The Quran says the decision is only for Allah. This means that human authority is limited and should always align with divine guidance. Leadership in Islam isn't about popularity, it's about responsibility. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, often consulted his companions on important matters, showing that leaders should seek advice and guidance. This system, called shura, is a form of consultation where decisions are made based on knowledge, integrity, and the greater good, not just popular demand. What do you think about the idea of popular sovereignty versus Islamic governance? Does the concept of ultimate power lying with the people appeal to you? Or do you see more wisdom in the Islamic view that all power belongs to Allah? Our next principle is free and fair elections, one of the cornerstones of democracy. The idea is simple. People get to choose their leaders through a transparent and impartial process, and everyone's vote counts equally. This concept became especially popular with democratic movements in the 18th century in countries like the US and France, where citizens demanded a say in who governed them. But while the idea of elections sounds great, it's not always perfect in practice. Elections can be influenced by money, media, and misinformation, making the process less fair than it seems. Sometimes those with the loudest voices or the most resources can sway public opinion, leading to results that don't always reflect the true will of the people. Islamic governance traditionally approached leadership selection differently. The early caliphs, for example, were chosen through shura, where respected companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, would come together to decide who was most fit to lead. This was based on qualities like piety, knowledge, and the ability to uphold justice, not just popularity. Some modern scholars argue that today's elections could be adapted within an Islamic framework if they are conducted in a way that respects Islamic values, like honesty, integrity, and a commitment to justice. It's about ensuring that the process serves the people while staying true to the principles of Islam. What are your thoughts on modern elections versus the shura system in Islam? Do you think elections could work within an Islamic context, or is shura the better approach? Now let's look at the rule of law, another key pillar of democracy. This principle means that everyone, from the average citizen to the highest leader, is subject to the law. It's a way to ensure that no one has absolute power and that justice is applied equally to all. This concept was designed to prevent abuses of power and create a fair society. But even with the rule of law, things don't always work perfectly. Sometimes those with money or influence can find ways around the law, leading to corruption and injustice. This shows that while the rule of law is a good idea, it needs constant vigilance to be effective. In Islam, the rule of law is not just a social contract, but a divine command. The laws in Islamic governance are based on the Quran and Sunnah, which means they are meant to uphold moral and ethical standards that benefit the whole community. The Quran emphasizes justice, saying, "O you who believe, stand firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even if it is against yourselves or your parents." This teaches us that justice is an obligation, not just a legal formality. Islamic leaders from the Prophet, peace be upon him, to the early caliphs were held accountable to the same laws as everyone else. They were often corrected by scholars and the public, showing that in Islam, no one is above the law and everyone is answerable to Allah. How do you see the rule of law in democracy compared to Islam? Do you think one system does a better job of holding leaders accountable? Share your thoughts in the comments and let's explore this topic together. Next, let's talk about separation of powers. This is the idea that government should be divided into branches, like the executive, legislative, and judiciary, so that no one group has too much control. This principle was created to prevent any single person or group from having absolute power, ensuring a balanced and fair system. But there's a catch. Sometimes the branches can end up in conflict with each other, leading to delays and inefficiencies in decision-making. So while separation of powers is meant to keep things balanced, it doesn't always work perfectly. In Islamic governance, there wasn't a strict division like in modern democracies, but there were checks and balances in place. Leaders were guided by scholars, judges, and the principle of commanding good and forbidding evil. This created a system where leaders were constantly reminded of their duty to Allah and the people. The Prophet, peace be upon him, and the early caliphs regularly sought advice and were open to criticism, showing that power in Islam comes with accountability. Leaders were not above advice or correction. They were expected to act justly and be answerable to the community and to Allah. What are your thoughts on checks and balances in democracy versus accountability in Islam? Which system do you think better prevents the abuse of power? Finally, let's discuss the protection of rights and freedoms. In democracies, protecting individual freedoms, like freedom of speech, religion, and assembly, is seen as essential. These rights empower people, allowing them to express their opinions, challenge leaders, and live as they choose. However, there's a balance to be struck. Unlimited freedom can sometimes lead to issues like hate speech, moral decline, or actions that harm others. It's not always easy to balance personal freedom with the well-being of society. In Islam, rights and freedoms are respected, but are always balanced with responsibilities. The Quran emphasizes the protection of life, property, and honor, and promotes justice and fairness in all dealings. However, these freedoms are guided by ethical boundaries set by divine law. True freedom in Islam is found in submission to Allah, which protects both individuals and society from excess and harm. Islamic governance seeks to promote a harmonious and just society where everyone's rights are protected, but everyone also upholds their responsibilities to Allah and each other. What do you think about the protection of rights and freedoms in democracy compared to Islam? How can we best balance personal freedoms with the needs of society? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your perspectives can help us all understand these principles better. Today's journey has been about understanding these principles and exploring how they can complement each other in our diverse world. We invite you to reflect on these ideas and share your perspectives. Your insights and experiences enrich our collective understanding and help bridge different viewpoints. Thank you for being part of this exploration. Please like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with more enriching content. Until our next discussion, let's continue to learn and grow together.